Somewhere in Virginia, right now, there's a building with no windows, no sign, and almost nobody inside. Just rows of blinking metal, humming fans, and enough cable to wrap around a city twice. That's a data center. And I want you to guess something before we start. How much do you think one of these buildings makes per year, per employee? Most people guess a few $100,000. The real number for the best positioned facilities is closer to $50 million per employee, not per building, per person on the payroll. Stop and think about that for a second, because almost no other business on earth works like that. Here's why everyone wants in. You build a warehouse, fill it with servers, and companies pay you rent to plug in. No customers walking through the door. No inventory that spoils. No employee drama. Just machines, paying you every month, forever. In 2025, the U.S. spent over $77 billion building these things, almost triple the year before. Wall Street calls them digital real estate. Governments throw tax breaks at anyone who'll build one nearby. And almost none of that is actually true. A data center is not a real estate business. It's not a tech business either. Underneath, it's an electricity arbitrage business, and the exact same building, filled with the exact same amount of power, can make $4 million a year, or $60 million a year, depending on one decision almost nobody outside this industry understands. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what that decision is. Why some of the biggest data center projects in America got canceled by furious residents with pitchforks. And why a safe as a bank vault investment can turn into a stranded concrete shell worth a fraction of what it cost. Let's get into it. Quick gut check before we go further. When you picture owning a data center, what are you actually picturing? Because data center isn't one business. It's at least 5 different bets wearing the same building, and if you don't know which one you're looking at, every number in this video will confuse you. Hyperscale, self-owned. Google, Amazon, Meta building purely for themselves, not renting anything out. A cost center supporting a much bigger empire. You can't buy your way into this one unless you're already one of the 5 biggest companies alive, so set it aside. Wholesale leasing. A developer builds a massive facility and pre-leases the entire thing to one hyperscale tenant, sometimes before the concrete is even poured. Lower risk, lower margin, contracts running 15 years or longer. Retail colocation. This is what most people picture when they say data center business. You build the shell, then rent out space, power, and cooling to lots of different customers' banks, hospitals, mid-sized companies. Runs around $16 million per megawatt to build. More service-heavy, more moving parts. AI-dense, GPU facilities. The newest, most explosive category. Same electricity, packed with GPU clusters instead of general-purpose servers. This is the one that's about to make your jaw drop. We're coming back to it in about 90 seconds. Edge and modular. Small, fast-to-build units placed near cities for low latency. Cheaper entry, lower ceiling, but the only realistic door in if you don't have $300 million lying around. Every one of these is the same bet, dressed differently. How much can you charge for the same unit of electricity? Hold that question. Everything else in this video is really just an answer to it. Let's talk numbers, because the obvious costs alone are already staggering, and we haven't even gotten to the ones that surprise people. In 2026, a standard data center costs $10 to $12 million per megawatt to build. A modest 20-megawatt facility, small by industry standards, puts you at $200 to $240 million before you've signed a single customer. A mid-size, 50-megawatt facility runs $400 to $600 million. Not a typo. That's a you need institutional investors' price tag before the building even has a roof. Now here's where people get it wrong. They assume the building itself is the expensive part. It's not. The single biggest line item is the electrical system, transformers, backup batteries, generators, and it swallows about 45% of your entire budget. Cooling comes next, at 15 to 20%, and it's exploding right now, because AI chips run so hot that ordinary air conditioning can't keep up anymore. That's pushing operators toward liquid cooling, which costs far more to install. Built specifically for AI workloads. And all-in costs, construction plus tech fit-out, can hit roughly $37 million per megawatt. Triple the standard price. Same size building. But here's the hidden cost that catches almost everyone off guard, and it has nothing to do with construction at all. The power isn't guaranteed just because you have the money. In parts of the Mid-Atlantic grid, the price utilities pay just to reserve future power capacity jumped from around $30 per megawatt day in 2024 to over $330 per megawatt day today, 11 times higher in about 2 years. You can have the land, the permits, and the funding, and still be told you're waiting behind other projects in line for a grid connection that might not arrive for years. Money doesn't skip the line. Electricity does. Add it up, $200 million to $600 million, all in, before you've served a single customer and before anyone can promise you the power actually shows up on schedule. Here's the part nobody tells you, and it's the reason this entire video exists. You'd assume a data center sells space square footage, like a fancy storage unit. It doesn't anymore. Pricing in this industry has quietly shifted so that space barely matters. What you're actually selling is committed electrical capacity, measured in kilowatts. And here's the twist. The exact same kilowatt is worth wildly different amounts depending on what's plugged into it. Sit with this number. At typical rates in a top-tier market, around $370 per kilowatt per month, 1 megawatt of ordinary colocation capacity generates about $4.4 million a year. That's the boring, standard server room number. Now take that identical megawatt of electricity, and instead of general-purpose servers, pack it with dense GPU clusters for AI training. Industry estimates put the revenue potential at $10 million to $60 million a year for the same electrical connection. 2 to 13 times more money from a wire that didn't change at all. Read that again. Not a better location, not a bigger building, not more customers. The same watt of electricity sold in a different costume for up to 13 times the price. That's the entire AI data center gold rush. In one sentence, operators aren't racing to build more space, they're racing to convert boring electricity into premium electricity before anyone else beats them to it. This is why a data center isn't a real estate business or a tech business. Real estate profits from land and location. Data centers profit from something much narrower and much stranger. How fast you can turn one input electricity into the most expensive possible output before your competitors copy you. So buildings up, you understand the real product. Now come the costs that never make it into the glossy investor deck. Grid interconnection fees. Depending on the region, developers get asked to personally fund substation upgrades or new transmission lines just to get connected. Tens of millions of dollars, and it's rarely disclosed in early cost estimates. The redundancy tax. Want Tier 4 reliability the level banks and hospitals demand instead of Tier 3. Add 25 to 40% to your budget, because you're duplicating entire electrical and cooling systems, so nothing ever goes dark. Tax incentives with strings attached. States compete hard for these projects. Virginia, for example, offers a sales and use tax exemption for centers investing at least $150 million and hitting job creation thresholds. Sounds great until you miss the threshold, and the incentive gets clawed back retroactively. Community and political cost, the one almost nobody budgets for. Here's a number that should scare you. Over $64 billion in U.S. data center projects have been blocked or delayed by local opposition, not by engineers, by angry residents. In Cascade Locks, Oregon, a $100 million project was canceled outright after locals got so furious about rising utility rates that they recalled the officials who approved it. In Chesterton, Indiana, a $1.3 billion, 200-megawatt project died over air and water concerns. This isn't a fringe risk anymore, it's one of the top reasons big projects stall or collapse completely, right alongside power delays. We'll come back to this, it gets worse. Bring your own equipment discounts that quietly eat your margin. Some giant customers now negotiate to supply their own backup power systems, which lowers your lease rate. A deal that looks 10% cheaper than market might just mean the customer, not you, is pocketing part of the profit. None of this shows up on a cost per megawatt spreadsheet. All of it can turn a winning project into a broke one. You've probably seen someone online claim data centers print money with basically zero effort. Let's actually run the numbers and see if that survives contact with reality. Say you build a modest 20-megawatt retail colocation facility. At roughly $11 million per megawatt, that's $220 million in construction. Revenue, at the standard rate of about $370 per kilowatt month, 20 megawatts generates roughly $88 million a year in gross billings, remember. That scales directly off the 4.4 million per megawatt number from a minute ago. Now subtract, piece by piece. Electricity, the power you're reselling, typically eats 40 to 60% of operating costs. Let's take the middle, $44 million a year, gone, just passing power through. Staffing, security, insurance, and maintenance for a facility this size, another $8 to $12 million a year. Debt service on that $220 million construction loan, even at a conservative rate, $12 to $18 million a year. Run it, $88 million in revenue, minus $44 million in power, minus $10 million in operations, minus $15 million in debt, leaves you around $19 million a year in profit on a $220 million asset. Real, respectable, somewhere around 8 to 9% annually. Not print money for free. A capital-intensive infrastructure bet that pays off well only if the building fills up and the power actually shows up on time. Now here's your callback. Remember that AI number, 10 to 60 million per megawatt instead of 4.4 million. Build that same 20 megawatt facility for AI instead, and even at the low end you're staring at $200 million a year in revenue instead of 88 million. Except your construction cost also roughly triples to around $740 million, and your power draw, cooling complexity, and redundancy requirements all climb right along with it. That just add GPUs and 10x your income claim you saw online? It's not fake. It's just missing half the math. Data centers don't have a holiday season like a retail store. But they absolutely have cycles, and ignoring them is how experienced operators get burned. Summer is the expensive season. Cooling load spikes with outside temperature, and in hot regions, electricity costs, sometimes even availability, swing hard between July and January. Some utilities apply demand charges based on your single highest usage spike of the entire year, which means one brutal week in August can quietly set your electric bill for the next 12 months. There's also a contract cycle, and this one's a trap for newcomers. Wholesale and hyperscale leases run 10 to 15 years, so once a facility is full, revenue gets remarkably stable, exactly what institutional investors love. But that stability locks up the best locations and the most reliable tenants years in advance. By the time your new facility is ready to lease, the biggest, safest customers may already be spoken for. So if you want it in, build new, or buy existing. Building new gives you control over location, power contracts, and design, which matters, because older buildings often can't handle modern AI cooling loads without an expensive retrofit. But you're exposed to the two riskiest variables in the whole industry. Will the grid actually deliver power on time? And will the local community let you build at all? Given how many billion-dollar projects have been canceled by resident opposition in the last 2 years alone, buying existing skips years of permitting, grid queues, and political risk. You're getting a building that's already connected, already has tenants, but you inherit its limits. A facility built 5 years ago for standard servers may be structurally incapable of handling today's GPU density without a total electrical and cooling overhaul. And that overhaul can cost nearly as much as building fresh. And here's the trap hiding underneath both paths. AI-optimized facilities use specialized cooling and power setups that are expensive and complicated to convert to general-purpose use. Buy a building built for one specific workload, and if that market shifts, you're stuck holding a very expensive, very specific box with few other uses. Neither path is the safe one. Building new bets on permits and politics. Buying existing bets on a building's ability to keep up with a technology cycle that's currently moving faster than construction itself. Here's why this business gets marketed as more passive than it is. The pitch leans hard on words like passive, infrastructure, and digital real estate landlord language, because landlord income sounds safe in a comforting, boring way. Nobody markets a pitch deck as an electricity trading operation with 15-year contracts and grid dependency risk, even though that's closer to the truth. There's also a real trick aimed at customers, not investors, pricing by power instead of pricing by space. A decade ago, colocation providers sold square footage, easy to understand, easy to compare between providers. Today, pricing is built around committed kilowatts, a unit almost no customer outside the industry can intuitively judge the fair value of. That makes it much harder to shop around and spot a bad deal. which is exactly the point. It protects the provider's margin by making the price hard to benchmark. And there's a subtler trick buried in the tax incentive game. When a state pitches incentives to residents, it leans on jobs and investment. But data centers are some of the most automated, least labor-intensive large buildings ever constructed. The gap between billions in investment and a few dozen permanent jobs is exactly what's fueling the wave of local backlash we talked about earlier. Keep that gap in mind, it's about to bite someone. Let's talk about what happens when this goes wrong. Because a signed contract doesn't guarantee a finished building. In Cascade Locks, Oregon, a developer proposed a roughly $100 million data center. On paper, it looked like every success story in this video: big investment, promised jobs, a community hoping for economic development. Instead, residents grew alarmed about rising utility rates and suspicious of the developer's credibility. The backlash got strong enough that voters recalled the local officials who'd approved the project, and it was canceled outright. $100 million gone, not from a technical failure. Not from a bad location. From a town hall meeting that turned against the deal after the ink was already dry. Zoom out, and this isn't a one-off story. Tract withdrew 2 Arizona projects worth a combined $14 billion after opposition over building height and resource strain. A $1.3 billion, 200-megawatt project in Chesterton, Indiana, died over air and water concerns. In total, more than $64 billion in U.S. data center projects have been blocked or delayed by local opposition in under a year of tracking. These weren't scrappy, underfunded operators, some were backed by serious institutional money. The lesson: the balance sheet can be flawless, the power contract can be signed, and the project can still die in a folding chair at a community meeting. The optimistic scenario: you build a 20-megawatt AI-optimized facility, and AI compute demand keeps climbing the way it has for 3 straight years. You lock in the entire facility to one creditworthy hyperscale tenant on a 15-year contract before construction even wraps. Revenue lands at the high end of the AI-dense range, costs stay predictable because your tenant is stable and long-term. And your building becomes exactly the kind of boring, stable infrastructure income pension funds and REITs are fighting each other to acquire. This is the story every pitch deck is selling. The realistic scenario: construction runs 18 months over schedule because transformer equipment is backordered, a documented, industry-wide bottleneck right now. Meanwhile, the grid operator tells you your power connection date just slipped 2 years because you're behind other projects in the interconnection queue. While you wait, local residents organize against the project over water use and rising utility rates, and you burn an unplanned 6 figures on community relations and legal fees just to keep your permits alive. By the time you're finally built and powered, a competitor already signed the hyperscale tenant you were counting on, and you're stuck marketing retail colocation space at standard rates instead of AI premium rates, closer to that $4.4 million per megawatt number than the $60 million one. Your $220 million facility, projected to earn $19 million a year, is instead earning half that while your debt payments stayed exactly the same. Same building. Same electricity. A completely different outcome, decided almost entirely by timing, politics, and who signs their lease first. A data center looks like a warehouse full of machines quietly making you money while you sleep. It isn't. It's a bet on how fast you can turn 1 unit of electricity into the most expensive version of itself, wrapped in a fight over grid capacity, tax incentives, and the patience of the town next door. The building never changes. Only the price of the power flowing through it does. So here's the question worth sitting with. If the exact same watt of electricity can be worth $4 million or $60 million, depending on what's plugged into it, what else in the economy is being priced like a commodity, when it's actually being sold like a luxury? Let me know what you think that might be.